stocks coming out in earnings, you're going to want to pay attention to the tech stock rotations, which is why we tweeted it last night as a strong bearish rotation. In other words, we're starting to figure this thing out on the right-hand edge before it happens. So when you looked at yesterday's trade ideas here, and you started to say, well, what is that? Let's see that tech stock rotation narrative unfolding. Did anybody see it starting to unfold? This is the rotation I was talking about here. You see the time, 3:40? So there's that tech stock rotation I'm talking about. It was somebody was starting to get relatively heavy on the short sell on tech stocks when equities were making highs. When equities were making highs. So when equities are trading into these high prices, somebody is rotating on that knowledge that equities were rotating into high prices. So I tweeted out at this point, 3:40, right, that there is somebody on the offer on these tech stock rotations. So obviously when you see that, you start recognizing that, well, I want to try and look at that, and if I get that same rotation at higher prices, which you did, which you obviously did as it started to cycle back round again here, that divergence, it was upticking there, so you had to wait for the downtick. But look at the cash close. Do you see how exciting the cash close was? 7:30 there, and then as we came into the cash close, look at this, guys, 8:30. Look at that trade there. Is that not a kind of crazy good-looking trade? Look at the short-term narrative on that trade there. You see those two short-term narratives? Look at that sell trade there, and look at that sell trade there, knowing that we've got a tech-laden earnings report to come out at the cash close. Is that not a very, very strong storyline to be selling into? I think so, mate. So obviously you're selling into this at 38.70. We've already warned you 5 hours ago that there's a rotation taking place that we need to pay attention to. We didn't just say a sector bearish rotation. We said a strong sector bearish rotation. And obviously based on that, somebody somewhere is monetizing earnings numbers, aren't they? Somebody somewhere, 5 hours before the earnings report, somebody somewhere is monetizing those earnings reports. They're turning knowledge into cash, knowledge into positions. And obviously what happened? Well, we got the numbers out at the cash close, and all of a sudden we went from 38.70 and we gapped down into the close, and then the electronic restart, it was trading 38.30. You just sold 38.70, it's trading 38.30, and you've just monetized $2,000 per contract on your short S&P position. $2,000. Imagine you were in a position to see that with 100 contracts, and that's not a big position on the S&P, of course, or 1,000 contracts. $2,000 per contract there, guys. $2,000. You could be looking at somewhere like a couple of $100,000 by knowing that, just with 100 contracts. And obviously 100 contracts, as I said, is a very small position. But if you were trading 1,000 contracts with a normal position there, you're talking about a $2 million winner overnight. And it wasn't even overnight because it was basically the cash open for the electronic restart at 11 o'clock. $2,000. And you weren't finished there either, were you? Because obviously from that point onwards, you know that the dealers aren't going to start buying until we get down into the 20s. We know that. So if you're short selling up here at the 70s, if you're short selling into the 70s, you're obviously aware that that short sell into the 70s was going to be looking to try and find those buyers into the 30s down into the 20s area. You're already aware that we know about this guy here, the dealer in this area here. So obviously you're just watching for that storyline unfolding, and obviously just using it to bank some of the money against the dealer's positioning here. And that's what we're trying to understand about those little pieces of information. It's about knowing somebody somewhere is doing something with that knowledge. In other words, It comes back to that question, what's driving today's markets? What's driving the markets at this point this afternoon? Well, we've got all the data out, haven't we? And if we've got all the data out, what happens next? Well, if all the data's hit the market, the only thing that's going to happen next is the next piece of data, which is going to be the after-hours earnings reports. So if we know that the after-hours earnings reports has a lot of tech-laden stock in it, we start watching those stock rotations and we can recognize, whilst it's not mega bearish, it's definitely not bullish. Definitely not bullish. That's why I said at 3 o'clock yesterday that there is a strong sector bearish rotation. Yeah, this is a sector rotation, Subra. So we're looking at the K's and the U's and the K's and the U's and the Y's and the P's. Basically your Merrill's line. Your Merrill's line, your Warren line, your Merrill's line. So those basic, anytime we talk about sector rotations, we're talking about the K's and the Y's and the P's and the U's. So sector rotation, sell side, and an enormous winning trade for us yesterday. And it was really, really quite easy to make a fortune yesterday on those big top edge positions because we got liquidity, liquidity, liquidity. We got once, twice, 3 times a lady into the top edge, as every good short sell accumulation should. And obviously based on that structure, you can see exactly what the trade was. There's the capper price there. And obviously based on that structure there, you can see the target price was right into that price level there. Did we get target price? Damn tootin' right, we got target price, right? Can it get any easier than that, guys? Sector rotations. We talked about it when we talked about the Merrill's line. We talked about it when we talked about the Warren line. We talked about it when we talked about equities, those sector rotations. And getting involved in those, especially when we've got earnings reports coming out, is very, very, very important to us so we can see what they're doing with that sector rotation information. If you look at the sector rotations on a bigger macro chart, obviously it's not so much to do with that particular earnings report, but we can still get a read on sector rotations. You'll see a couple of very nice reversals. Does anybody see where the equity market went bullish? Anybody see where equities went bullish? When we started to be long equities predominantly off the low prices? It's really not hidden from view, is it? It's incredibly easy to notice. And you can see that, you know, from probably this reversal here on the 26th of September, you can see that every lower low was buyable based on the sector rotations. The big boys are buying stocks on sector rotations at this stage, buying stocks on sector rotations into these lower low prices. And again, the other day here was just incredible. The other day here was incredible on the 21st of October. Look at that buy opportunity against that sector rotation from here. That's nuts, isn't it? Absolutely nuts that you can get those types of discounts on your charts. So big opportunity to go long equities, and we've been with that trade ever since, basically being buying. That's why you'll see that we've never been concerned about equity drops. We've never been concerned about short selling equities. In fact, it's just been a very, very quiet, passive long trade off the bottom edges at this stage, hasn't it? It's not a madly aggressive buy trade at higher prices, but it is a nice, easy, passive buy trade off lows. We haven't been worried about downside. We've always been on the buy side of this narrative, and it's worked out an absolute treat. Now, obviously, one would imagine that if you're buying equities, you would be looking at selling dollars anyway, wouldn't you? That would be normal for you to try and look at that as a short sell in dollars. Well, you can start to recognize that the dollar did actually start to go short selling almost from the same time as equities went bid, and it started here, didn't it? This is dollar inverted, and you can see that there was a very aggressive reversal on the dollar. Remember, that was the pivot that we talked about a while ago. You remember it? We talked about it in classroom for quite a bit, and we talked about it in the tweets for a couple of tweets as well. We talked about the pivot taking place where the expectation was starting to change from the 75s to the 50s. It doesn't mean it's changing on the next release. It means it's changing on the release after that from 75 to 50. And that pivot just allowed the markets a breather. It just allowed the markets to breathe a little bit easier. And it's caused the dollar selling, and it's caused the equity buying. Really, really straightforward, guys, but you've got to make sure that you obviously pay attention to it as it happens. And you too could call tweets like that sector bearish rotational tweet that we sent out at 3 o'clock yesterday. And obviously that's what's caused this brilliant short sell that we got last night. Straightforward stuff, guys. I know there's a lot in it. Make any difference? You're trading the markets, guys. You know that. It's not going to be easy. You've got to just make sure you're ready to do the necessary amount of work to be successful. It's simple.